Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening everyone. Baruch Haba. Welcome everyone not only to the shir but to this week's new venue here in our shul, Sefer Mordechai. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you to the cell phone lockers as you come in. So in this shul, everyone is welcome, but the condition of entry is you have to leave your phone in there. Don't be embarrassed. You could get up now and put it there. That's your permission to come in. Otherwise, it's trespassing. Now, seriously, I don't joke around. I'm not funny. I don't, When I started in Rabbanis, my father said, Donnie, stick to the Divrei Torah, But I'm serious. And not only that, not only do you need to put your phone in the cell phone locker, if you're listening or if you're coming, please bring this back to your own shul. Ask them why they allow phones in the shul. If the phone is in the shul, it's not exactly a Beis HaKnesses, it's paying homage to the ancient custom of Hebrews who used to gather in prayer. But at least it's that. It's like a zikaron to the concept of Beis HaKnesses and prayer. Okay, welcome everyone. Some people never even met me before. Can you imagine what an introduction, But tonight's show, we're continuing our series on Sefer Vayikra, which are again dedicated by Dr. Zakai Mashpachtel Nishmas Shom Eliezer ben Rabbi Yaakov Zakai, Rivka Bas Tovia Levi, Rab Dav ben Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi HaKohen. Tonight's shir is dedicated by our dear friend Rab David Weber in honor of his father's yahrzeit, Chaf Zayin Lamed Nisan, Rabbi Yitzchak Doiv ben Alter Abraham. For his whole family, for Simchas Hanachas, Ad Bias Koel Tzedek. We have a number of sponsors tonight. Tonight's shir is also dedicated by my dear friend Reb Avi Aaron Bayav, Lilo Nishmas, his grandfather, Azaria ben Adizai, V'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchasai. Tonight's shir is dedicated by Reb Avi Tachman, Lilo Nishmas, his grandmother, Rivka Bas Chaim Yosef Gershaim. The Gan Eden Tehei Menuchasai, she should be able to say shar for his whole family. For Simchas Nachas Ad Bias Koel Tzedek. Tonight's shir is dedicated by Rabbi Eliezer Jacobowitz, Lili Nishmas, his father, Harav Shloima ben Harav Moshe Yehuda. The Gan Eden Tehei Menuchasai, she should be able to say shar for his whole family. And tonight's shir is dedicated by Rab David Boskila, Le'iloi Nishmas, his father, Emmanuel ben Saada. May his neshama have an aliyah, Began Eden Tehei Menuchasai. Now, it worked out very well. The Belarus government made a new rule. See, we're headed there next week. We're going to the kever of the Chofetz Chaim. But if you're an American citizen, you can't just go to Belarus. You need a visa. So a passport's not good enough. You need a visa. So how would you get a visa? So some countries, for example, when I went to Australia, I didn't know I had to get some kind of permission from the government to get entry. So what do? I had to download an app. Then you have to somehow take a picture. And then before you get on the plane, the government there has to approve of you. But it's until you download it and they approve the picture, and the picture is the right picture with the glasses, without the glasses, it's very complicated. But at least you don't have to go anywhere. But Belarus, they made a new law yesterday, that's how they work, that no more apps. If you want a visa, you have to go down to Washington. So anyone going on a trip had to overnight the passport to a guy who went to the Belarus ambassador, met with him yesterday. The whole night he deliberated whether we have reshus to enter, we don't have reshus. Baruch Hashem, the response came back that we have reshus to enter. But it came out very convenient that we're going to speak today about one of the most important Sfarim ever written in the history of the Jewish people. The pasuk says in Parshas Metzorah, Zois Tia Toiras HaMetzorah. This is the law of the leaper, the law of someone who has saras. B'yom Taharasai, on the day of his purity, V'huva el Kohein, he will be brought to the Kohein. We all know that literally this is referring to someone who has saras. You don't go to a doctor, you don't go to an accountant, you have to go to a Kohein. The Kohein is the one who renders you impure, the Kohein is the one who could be metaher you. You can't, if the Kohein doesn't say tahar, then indefinitely the person remains in a state of tumah. However, many Gedolei Yisrael saw in this pasuk a reference to one of the greatest Sefarim ever written, namely Sefer Chofetz Chaim. Sefer Chofetz Chaim was one of the great gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to the Jewish people, written by the Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Meir Kagan. In fact, in the Sefer, Divrei is a classic Sefer of Musar by Rabbi Alexander Moshe Lapidos. He says, Zois tia toiras hametzoira. If someone has tsaras, meaning if someone is afflicted with the malady of not being able to control their mouth from speaking Lashon Harah, so tsaras is like a code word, somebody who's not able to control themselves from speaking Lashon Harah. As the Gemara says, Kulam ba'avak Lashon Harah, that Lashon Harah is a sin that unless you're careful in, you could assume that a person stumbles in. You know, the Gemara says, a strong minority of people stumble in areas of morality. Most people stumble in monetary issues. Many people have money in their pocket that doesn't belong to them. Everyone, if they're not careful, will stumble in Lashon Harah. So what do you do if a person is weak in Lashon Harah? The answer is, V'hu v'ala Kohein. You got to go to the Kohein. Who's the Kohein? The great Kohen Gadol. Who? Rabbi Meir HaKohen, the Baal Chofetz Chaim. So the Gedolim saw in this pasuk a reference to the great work of the Chofetz Chaim, that this was the modern day way that the Kohen could be mataher us from the malady of Lashon Harah. The Chofetz Chaim wrote many svarim on Koach HaDibor. Besides Chofetz Chaim and Shmiras HaLashon, he wrote something called Sfas Tamim. He wrote a sefer called Zachar LeMiriam. He wrote a sefer called Chayvas HaShmira. In Sefer Zachar Miriam, the Chofetz Chaim says, Baruch Hashem, I reached 80 years old. You know, the Chofetz Chaim was born in 1838. There are many legends how long he lived. He lived 95 years. Chofetz Chaim lived 95 years. He says, I've Baruch Hashem reached 80, and my entire life I never diverted my attention from contemplating the faculty of speech. Chofetz Chaim was fascinated with the faculty of speech. Legend has it that when the Chofetz Chaim reached a very old age, he called one of his Talmidim over. He said, come over! So the Talmud got very nervous. You know, what's Chofetz Chaim going to do to me? Chofetz Chaim says, look at my mouth! You know, what's going to happen? So Chofetz Chaim said, open up my mouth! And then the Chofetz Chaim, look at my teeth! The guy thought he was going to faint or go to Olam Haba immediately. Then the Chofetz Chaim said, count my teeth. And Chofetz Chaim was already advanced in years, and this student counted 32 snow white teeth of the Chofetz Chaim. Now in America, you know, who knows, maybe the guy got teeth whitening, the guy got fluoride treatment, even though 2 states already have banned fluoride in the water. Okay, but you know, back in the day, at 95 years old, you're lucky if you had any teeth in your mouth, let alone snow white teeth. That's what the legend they say about the Chofetz Chaim. Now, one of the great values of Sefer Chofetz Chaim is the fact that it's an entire Sefer dedicated just to the laws of Lashon Harah. So we've spoken this out many times. You know, there's a Sefer Erech HaPayim. It's about anger. So the author of Erech HaPayim says, you know, this is a very important work, this work about anger. Because even if you never open it up, but if you know there's a book out there that's about anger, then you say to yourself, you know, I thought it's just something that it's better to avoid, it's maybe not so nice, it's a minhag not to get angry, but there's actually a whole sefer on it, it must be very severe. The same thing with Lashon Harah. You know, people learn different Gemaras, and maybe over the years, one may have heard, if you speak Lashon Harah, it's equal to Avodah Zarah, Gili Arayas, Shfichas Damim. If you speak Lashon Harah, it's like you're Kaifer Be'ikr. But then you forget, then you learn a different sugya. Then you learn, you know, Shlichas Yad, Tzricha Chisaron, or Loy Tzricha Chisaron. But if there's an entire book dedicated to the laws of Lashon Harah, even if you never pick it up, you can't just like whitewash it and say, those people, they have a minhag, they don't eat gebrux and they don't speak Lashon Harah, and I eat gebrux and I speak Lashon Harah. I once had a guy who told me it's his minhag to talk by davening. His father spoke by davening, and the guy he happened to be a comedian. No, seriously, he was professionally, but he was serious. That was the one serious thing, you know. And people think like that it's not a big deal. There are different customs. Some shuls, they have a minhag to do one thing. By the way, don't be embarrassed. I want to introduce everyone to the cell phone locker when you come in. Please use it. That's the condition of entry. Don't be embarrassed if you didn't use it yet. I would have also forgot, but just reminding everyone, if you could kindly deposit your phones in there. Okay, so that's the Maila of the Sefer Chofetz Chaim. Where did the Chofetz Chaim get this idea from? For 3,300 years, there was no book in Klal Yisrael about the laws of Lashon Hara. Who gave him this idea? There's a Sefer Shimusha Shel Torah. Shimusha Shel Torah are stories written by Reb Shach, said over by Reb Shach. Reb Shach would say over that one time Rabbi Yisrael Salanter gave a drasha. He said, one of the reasons why people are very loose when it comes to Lashon Hara is because there's no book specifically dedicated to Lashon Hara. If there would only be one Sefer that outlines all the prohibitions and all the issues and all the halachos, it would really strengthen Klal Yisrael in the laws of Lashon Hara. And the Chofetz Chaim took this to heart. And legend has it, that's why the Chofetz Chaim wrote Sefer Chofetz Chaim. In fact, in the Sefer Shimusha Shel Torah is brought, how old do you think the Chofetz Chaim was when he wrote Sefer Chofetz Chaim? He was, according to the Sefer, 36 years old. That's what's brought in the Sefer Shimusha Shel Torah, but it's not accurate. It's not true. He was not 36 years old. There are a few official biographies of the Chofetz Chaim. You have the Sefer HaChofetz Chaim Chayav Upa'alai by Rabbi Moshe Yashar. And then you have the Sefer Michtevei Harav Chofetz Chaim, which was written by the Chofetz Chaim's son, Aryeh Leib Pupko. Now, how his son had a different last name than him is beyond the scope of this share. But his son wrote a biography. And whatever you think the Chofetz Chaim was, he wasn't. Whatever your picture of what a tzaddik is exactly 180 degrees the opposite. Mesilas Yesharim writes that Ki HaChasidus Ha'amiti Rachaik Mitzir Sechlenu. Real righteousness, not we don't know what it is even far from our imagination, because we are so warped from the societal picture of what a tzaddik does and looks like. We think that tzaddik wakes up early and he goes to the mikvah and he prepares a long time for davening. The Chofetz Chaim, you have to learn about what a tzaddik was. The Chofetz Chaim, according to, it's interesting, the Chofetz Chaim was very upset with Jews who are going to America. Going to America, that's like, you're giving it all up. If somebody would come to the Chofetz Chaim to get a bracha when they're going to America, Chofetz Chaim wouldn't look at you. And one time his son, Aryeh Pupko, he says, you're making a mistake over here. They're not listening to you. So Chofetz Chaim says, what do you think I should do? So his son, what do I think you should do? I think you should move to America. You need to move to America. The Jews are going to America. You move there and go from house to house and city to city and rebuke them and reprimand them. That's what you need to do. And Rabbi Aryeh Leib, his son, even brought him a raya. The Navi Yirmiyah told everyone after Churban Bayis Rishon, no one go to Mitzrayim, no one go to Egypt, no one go to Egypt, no one go to Egypt. And everyone went to Egypt, and the next thing you know, Yirmiyah is living in Egypt. What happened? He's the one who told me now to go. That's right. They weren't allowed to go, but they didn't listen. Once they didn't listen, so the Rebbe had to go. Because Talmid Shegala, Rabbi Goylen Acharav. If the student goes into Golas, the Rebbe has to follow. So the Chofetz Chaim did not follow at first the Chofetz Chaim looked at him like he's off the wall. But shortly after, a new Sefer came out called Nidchei Yisrael, of the halachos of what Jews in America should do. Chofetz Chaim wrote a Sefer, Machon Maggid Harakiah, of all the leniencies that soldiers in the Russian army are allowed to take advantage of. He wouldn't tell Yeshiva Bachar about this Sefer, but it was all how to keep Shabbos at least Midah. The Chofetz Chaim began working on Sefer Chofetz Chaim at age 28 years old. Okay, so that means we're talking now 1866. He's 28 years old. He began by writing the Psicha. If anyone ever saw Sefer Chofetz Chaim, the Psicha talks about 17 lavim that you could be violating if you speak Lashon Hara. Chofetz Chaim talks about, if somebody, heaven forbid, would eat kidneys on Pesach. Well, kidneys on Pesach. Oy vay. They would be like, they would feel guilty for 6 months. But it's only a minhag. And if somebody chash v'sham ate chazer treif, they would, who knows what they would do? They would jump off a bridge or something. Says Chofetz Chaim, one word of Lashon Hara is worse than chazer. So why don't people have the proper evaluation of how severe something is? So Chofetz Chaim began at age 28 years old by writing the Psicha. And then in the year 1871 and 1872, he composed Sefer Chofetz Chaim Chelek Aleph, Sefer Chofetz Chaim Chelek Beis. He's working on it. He's only 30 years old. His son, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, there's amazing things that he wrote. One of the things that he wrote is that his mother practically never davened because the Chofetz Chaim told her she's exempt because she's taking care of the children. Can you imagine? The wife of the Chofetz Chaim, kemat loy hispalala, she'avid siva loy, she'oisek b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah. Now, the Chofetz Chaim's wife on Shabbos would go around from house to house and collect all the leftover food that people weren't eating and give it out to the aniyim. The poverty in Radin is, unimaginable. Chofetz Chaim attributed all of his success in learning to the fact, he said, my wife never needed a new house, never needed new clothing, she didn't need anything. And the Chofetz Chaim attributes his success in Ruchnius to his wife. Now, if you want to write a Sefer, first thing you need is a cell phone locker. Because if you have your phone on you, you can't accomplish anything in life. It's not even it saps you from any productivity whatsoever. The Chofetz Chaim, though, was not able to live at home when he wrote his Sfarim. Because even though, by the way, the amazing thing is, so what was the Chofetz Chaim stellar? What did he do for a living? He wasn't a Rav. He wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva. He had no official capacity. He sat and wrote Sfarim. His wife maintained the store. When enough money came in for the day, the store was shut. Chofetz Chaim did not maintain any position in any capacity whatsoever. Chofetz Chaim had to move out of his house to write Sefer Chofetz Chaim. 4 parsa away from the house, he came to a city of Vasselshuk. Now, but how's he going to eat? He ate in the shul. He slept in the shul. But the Chofetz Chaim, how is he going to get food? Uber Eats? No, there was no Uber Eats. So what he did was, he had a relative who brought him food. The Chofetz Chaim said, I'm not going to take food for free. His relative had a yeshiva. The Chofetz Chaim said, send me the Bachrim who already finished Shas, who are learning Gemara, Tosfos, and the Marsha. And the Chofetz Chaim gave them a shiur for 3 hours a day to earn his sandwich, to sit in the shul. And for months and months, the Chofetz Chaim, uninterrupted, wrote Sefer Chofetz Chaim. Now you'll say, why couldn't he do it in the home? He didn't have a job. He didn't have an official capacity. Even though he didn't have an official capacity, every problem in the city, despite the fact that there was a Rav, came to the Chofetz Chaim. When the Chofetz Chaim published Sefer Chofetz Chaim, you opened it up. Who wrote it? No one knew. Didn't say his name. He didn't put his name on it. No one had any idea. Not only that, the Chofetz Chaim used to sell his Svarim. He went from house to house and city to city selling his Svarim. We have today Mishnah Bruras. Now, the Chofetz Chaim would examine every single Sefer, page by page, and when he made sure that every page was the way it's supposed to be, he wrote it in his handwriting, Muga. The Chofetz Chaim would knock on a door. You want to buy the Mishnah Brura, you want to buy Sefer Chofetz Chaim. And who wrote it? Who are you? I'm the publisher. He didn't want to lie. So he said he's the publisher, but he didn't want to say he wrote it. For 50 years, no one had any idea that the Chofetz Chaim wrote it. Not until he had to get involved in community affairs did he put his name on it. And whenever he signed his name, anything that was relevant to the tzibur, he would write, Yisrael Meir HaKohein, Bal HaMechaber, Sefer Chofetz Chaim, U'Mishnah Brura, so that his word would carry weight. So they asked him, why don't you put your name on the book? He said, because I did not write this book in my merit, it's in the merit of the Jewish people. Klal Yisrael has been weak in Inyani Lashon Hara, and it's in the merit of the Jewish people that this Sefer came out, and I don't want to take any credit for it. Now, Chofetz Chaim's son said, Abba never told me why he wrote this book. But he says, I suspect it was because of something that happened in Radin. What happened in Radin? There was a problem with the rabbi. What was the problem? The problem was there were people in the shul. So if there are people in the shul, there's a problem with the rabbi. So they wanted to send the rabbi out. What did they say? They said the rabbi's children are too modern. They're being influenced by the Haskalah, which wasn't true. So now they involved the Rabbanim in Vilna. They involved the Rabbanim in the area. The Chofetz Chaim tried to make peace, and they were bad-mouthing the rabbi. Says Rabbi Aryeh Leib HaKohen, if you want to know how in Sefer Chofetz Chaim, the Chofetz Chaim is so attuned to the politics of what takes place in the shul coffee room and in the back seats. Like the Chofetz Chaim gives examples. If you ever learn Sefer Chofetz Chaim, he says, for example, the rabbi gives a drasha, and Shmerel in the back said, where'd he get that drasha from? Well, who told him that drasha? He printed it out, he Googled it, where'd he get that drasha from? How did the Chofetz Chaim know all the juicy Lashon Hara that people say in the shul? There's no question, because of the Maisa Shahaya in the city of Radin, the Chofetz Chaim felt firsthand the dangers of Lashon Hara. Chofetz Chaim's son said he tried to get out of his father exactly what happened. He wouldn't say, but one time Chofetz Chaim slipped. And the Chofetz Chaim said, I want to tell you about a personal practice I had. Back in the day, one of the Rabbanim came to me to ask me about what's going on in Radin. And this is a good practice. And, what am I going to say? It's always, when you don't want to talk about something, what do? The guy said, oh, you don't want to talk about it. Okay, I respect that. I'm sure you have good reasons that you don't want to talk about. So, just quickly, and then somehow, the whole thing, you spill the beans. What's how you spill the beans? You're holding I'm not sure. We like to darshan the etymology of expressions here in the shul. I guess the guy has a jug of beans, and he's holding it upright, and he's starting to tilt. But as soon as it tilts a little bit too much, all the beans spill out. I don't know if that's the etymology of spill the beans, but that's definitely human nature. So the Chofetz Chaim told this rabbi, I just want to tell you something. I have a practice, I don't talk about it. And it's an effective response. In other words, if you have information and people are trying to get it from you, instead of fumfering around, coming up with some kind of, diplomatic way of responding, saying nothing by saying a lot of words, some people are good at that. Some people are good at chicken salad. I'm not saying any names. They could say a lot of words without saying anything. There's a famous joke the Malbim once said. After hearing a Reform rabbi speak, the Malbim said he finally understands, in Sefer Kohein, you have the 28 times. You have a time to love and a time to hate. So the Malbim says all these various times, there are two extremes, and there's a happy medium. Love and hate, there's indifference. But I never understood a time to speak and a time to be silent. What's the happy medium? Either you're talking or you're not talking. But after hearing this esteemed rabbi, he realized there's a happy medium. You could talk without saying anything. That's the happy medium. Anyway, the Chofetz Chaim said that ultimately this rabbi had to leave the city, and it wasn't good for his health, and it took years off his life. But anyone who was involved in that dispute died young. That's what the Chofetz Chaim said. However, the Chofetz Chaim would also say the best thing that ever happened to the rabbi is that he had to leave the city, because the truth is Haskalah was very strong in that city. He ended up moving to a different city. There were a lot of Hasidim there. He wasn't a Chassid, he was a Litvak. But his sons married the daughters of the Hasidim, and the Shver made them Hasidish. And they ended up becoming Poskim, and they got jobs in Hasidish cities as Poskim, and now they're from the Gedolei Hadar. All because they had some, rabble-rousers in that particular shul. Now, without getting into too much information, the Chofetz Chaim had to overcome many challenges in his life, including when he was younger, a young man, not a teenager, older than that. For an entire year, he suffered from very deep atzvos, very like a clinical sadness. And it was so severe, he wasn't able to learn. He couldn't even daven. He couldn't even daven properly. And he thought he would never come out of it. And Chofetz Chaim went to different doctors. And the Chofetz Chaim, after 1 year, he pulled himself out of it, and he never suffered again. Can you imagine? This is what Rabbi Aryeh HaKohen writes about his father. Years later, the Chofetz Chaim suffered a terrible ailment for 3 months, a terrible stomach ailment. And he went to different doctors. He had to go to Vilna. And a relative of the Chofetz Chaim told Rabbi Yisrael Salanter about the Chofetz Chaim's malady. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter davened for the Chofetz Chaim, and the whole life the Chofetz Chaim would say that he is sure that because of the prayers of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he had a refuah shalema. When Rabbi Yisrael Salanter saw Sefer Chofetz Chaim, he says, I can't believe it. This young Avrich took one pasuk in Chumash and he made a whole Shulchan Aruch on one pasuk in Chumash. Lo yiselech Rachel ba'amecha. Rabbi Yisrael told the Chofetz Chaim, now, for many hundreds of years, the minhag in Klal Yisrael is, you can't produce a Sefer without a haskama. And there are reasons for that. You can't just write a book. You need to have a haskama on the Sefer. So the Chofetz Chaim went to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter for a haskama. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter asked the Chofetz Chaim to leave the Sefer with him. And the Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was amazed by the Sefer. But he said, Yisrael Meir, I have an issue with one thing that you wrote. The Chofetz Chaim writes in number 10 in Klal Dalet Sif Yud Beis that if you spoke Lashon Hara about someone, let's say you say, Ploini Almoini, the guy is, he doesn't really daven with kavanah. So let's say you told this to Beryl. Beryl couldn't care less that Ploini Almoini doesn't daven with kavanah. It didn't make any roishim on Beryl. It didn't lower this guy's esteem in the listener's eyes. So now all you did was, it's not really bein adam lachaveroi, because you didn't, by speaking about this guy, you didn't cause him any harm. No, but you didn't lower his esteem in anyone's eyes. So all you did technically is an avera bein adam lamakayim. You violated Lashon Hara. It's between you and God. So you do tshuva between you and Hashem. But what if you damaged someone? You caused someone damage. You lowered their esteem in someone's eyes. The listener said, oh, this guy's not trustworthy. I'm not going to do business with him. And you hurt the guy's business. So now, not only is it between you and God, it's between you and him. Says the Chofetz Chaim, you can't get mechila unless you go to him and tell him what you said about him and ask him for mechila. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, really? Because you want to get kapara from Hashem, you have a right to hurt the feelings of this guy, and you tell him what you said about him? You have no right to tell him. So, but then you're not going to get kapara. Yeah, that's your problem. You're not going to get kapara. But you have no right to hurt his feelings and to let him know what you said about him. So there's a very big discussion in the Poskim. Under what? So the Chofetz Chaim responded that he took his words from Rabbeinu Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina says that if you hurt someone's feelings and they don't know about it, you have to let them know and ask them for mechila. So there's a big discussion in the Poskim. Under what circumstances do you have to apprise the person you spoke about in order to get mechila? In other words, let's say the person knows someone spoke about him, but they don't know who spoke about him. Do you have to go and tell the guy, Rabbi Yid, I know you don't know who spoke about you, but I'm a big tzaddik, so I'm here to tell you it was me. I'm the guy who badmouthed you. You think you're going to make the guy feel good if you let him know that it was you? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter argued you can't tell him. How do you get kapara? Maybe you don't get kapara, or maybe Einas Rachmana Patre. It's a question. There's a big discussion in the Poskim under what circumstances you need to apprise the listener about what you said about him. Now, here's one of the reasons why Rabbi Yisrael Salanter really appreciated Sefer Chofetz Chaim. One of the great teachings of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is if a person is weak in a certain area, let's say like this, let's say a person is prone to anger, let's say a person is weak in monetary matters, let's say a person is weak in guarding their eyes, and it's always a struggle. You know, whenever you're encountered with a situation, when your anger is aroused, or when you could look at something, it's always, should I not? Should I not? It's always a fight. So like, how do you ever give yourself the advantage, you know? Every time it's like the World Series game where you have two equally stacked teams, it's not right. Like, when am I going to grow up and make this fight a little bit easier? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had a great chidush. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter taught that if you learn the subject that you're weak in, be'ion, you learn it deeply, you study it with all the various details, and you toil in it, you'll weaken the Yetzer Hara in that area. That's the chiddush of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So someone who is prone to have a loose tongue, by learning Sefer Chofetz Chaim and all the lav in your over and all the Gemaras from which we derive the halachas, by learning the subject be'ion, it will weaken your Yetzer Hara. So Rabbi Yisrael saw in Sefer Chofetz Chaim so to speak, the fruition of his ideology, that when you learn a subject be'ion, you know, think about it. Everybody has things in their life that's their weak point. In other words, whatever it may be, some people, maybe they should learn more. Some people, maybe they should come earlier to davening. Some people, maybe they should be more careful the way they speak. So like, okay, I'm struggling. How do I ever get the edge? How do I get the edge? Rabbi Yisrael taught you get the edge by learning the subject in depth. So in the introduction to Sefer Chofetz Chaim, he brings down a medrash in Parshas Nasai, Im Yagata, number 12, Harbe b'Divreim. If you toil greatly in the words of the Chachamim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meiser Yetzer Hara Mimcha, God will remove the Yetzer Hara from you. Therefore, I said in my heart, it says the Chofetz Chaim, maybe by learning this Sefer, which is gathered from all the words of the Rishonim, and by studying it, the Yetzer Hara will not be so strong in this area, and it will make a dent in the observance of the Jewish people. The Chofetz Chaim received a glowing haskama from none other than Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So you would expect, if you open up Sefer Chofetz Chaim, to find a haskama from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. The only thing is, there is no haskama from the Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in Sefer Chofetz Chaim. You could only conjecture why. In the biography on the Chofetz Chaim, he suggests that it was so effusive, the praise was so effusive of the Chofetz Chaim, maybe the Chofetz Chaim out of modesty did not put it in. I'm not sure. It's hard to imagine that, especially he wrote the book anonymously. So if he wrote it anonymously, who cares that it's an effusive praise to the author? You know, once we're conjecturing, here's mine. Not everybody agreed with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter about learning Musar. It was not universally accepted to learn Musar. In Reb Baruch Ber and his yeshiva, I don't think they learned Musar. Maybe the Chofetz Chaim was afraid with the haskama from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, people would think, oh, if you're from the camp of Musar, this is a good sefer from you. But if you're from the camp of anti-Musar, then stick to the Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. So maybe to give it more of a universal appeal, even though Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was the Gadol Hadar. But again, we don't know why the Chofetz Chaim did not print a haskama from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So it's now 1872, and it's time for the Sefer Chofetz Chaim to come out. And the Chofetz Chaim received haskamas from Rabbi Moshe Aryeh of Yanova, who extolled the great virtues of the Chofetz Chaim. And they wrote, don't think the author didn't write his name, because if he would have wrote his name, then it would diminish from his schar in Olam Haba. So he didn't write his name for his own personal share in Olam Haba. No, he did it totally l'shem shamayim. They were worried, they would suspect that the author didn't write his name because he was trying to garner more schar in Olam Haba. Then the Chofetz Chaim came to the great Rav of Navardik. And I know you would ask me, what does he look like? I knew you would ask me that. So I put his picture on the sheet. By the way, Rav B'Tzalel of Vilna wrote about Sefer Chofetz Chaim on the third line on the top on page 4. V'zois Tairas hamoitzi ra b'yoim ta'arasai v'huva Kohein. That on the day that you want to purify yourself from the malady of Lashon Harah, you got to go to the Kohein. Who's the Kohein? The Chofetz Chaim.
He was a Kohen?
He was a Kohen. He was a Kohen, yes. That's why the shir is on Parshas Metzorah, because it says, Zois tia Tairas ha-Metzorah b'yoim ta'arasai v'huva Kohein. Not because we're going to go to the Chofetz Chaim next week. It's from the Parsha. Zois tia Tairas ha-Metzorah b'yoim ta'arasai v'huva el Kohein.
When did the Torah start?
What year? The Chofetz Chaim says in Shmiras Halashon that even though Bisman Hazeh there's no tsaras, sometimes Hashem exchanges it for a loss of money, that it could affect a person's finances. In any event, the Chofetz Chaim came to Rav Baruch Mordechai Lifshitz, the Navardikoi, the great Rav of Navardik, who didn't know who the Chofetz Chaim was. He sees a young man, he sees the Sefer, he's astounded by the content of the Sefer, he's amazed by the Yirah Shamayim and the modesty of this person standing in front of him, but he wasn't ready to give haskama. He asked the Chofetz Chaim to wait in the city for a couple days. Meanwhile, people start meeting Chofetz Chaim in shul, and they go over to Chofetz Chaim. Yeah, where do you come from? Radin. Yeah, it's a nice city there, right? The Rabbanim there, they know anything? They know what's going on there. They get along with the Balabatim. Whose fault is it? And the Rav of Navardik sent spies to test out the Chofetz Chaim for 7 days to see whether he himself practices what he preaches. And one particular Rav named Rav Nassan Nata Kimchi, who eventually became a Rav in Nizbudki, struck up the conversation with Chofetz Chaim for 6 hours, trying to get him this way, that way, to talk about, and the Chofetz Chaim, the legend has it that the Chofetz Chaim would prefer to talk about cows than to talk about other people. Chofetz Chaim would not go anywhere near any questionable topic. And after 7 days, he comes back to the Rav. He says, Rav, I failed miserably. I couldn't even get him to say one iota, one particle of Lashon Harah. So the Navardik Rav gave Chofetz Chaim a glowing report, which included that he's Noah Doiresh v'Noah Mekayim. He says well, he speaks well. In other words, his teaching is proper and he fully observes it. So we'll end with this. The Chofetz Chaim in the Psicha to Sefer Chofetz Chaim, he says that, he wrote the Psicha before he wrote any other part of the Sefer. He says he asked the reader to read and reread and reread again the Psicha, because it will be more beneficial than any other part of the Sefer. Why? Listen to this. Because the Psicha of Sefer Chofetz Chaim is collected from the Rishonim, and the words of the Rishonim are holy and pure. Boyarois kamari halapidim. They burn like the fire of a torch Why? Why are the words of the Rishonim so impactful? Ubevadai shamru es atzman mimida gru azatachli. So you could be sure that the Rishonim guarded themselves from speaking Lashon Hara until the epitome. Al kain divrehen payalin ma'oid belev kairein. Therefore, the words they write are very effective. Chofetz Chaim says a very important chiddush here, that if you want to influence someone, your words will only be as influential as the extent that you yourself observe what you say. And therefore the psicha, which comes from the Rishonim, will be the most powerful of all. And I think that's something important we could say about Sefer Chofetz Chaim, because we know how careful the Chofetz Chaim himself was in the area of Lashon Hara. Therefore, Sefer Chofetz Chaim has had a revolutionary impact on the Jewish people. If there's any one book written in the last 500 years that has influenced the Jewish people, you can make the case Sefer Chofetz Chaim has had a bigger impact than any Sefer written in the last 500 years. The only thing that may be second or maybe even first is Mishnah Berurah. So, by the way, Mishnah Berurah, he did put his name on. And the reason he put his name on it is because he said if anybody has questions, bring it to me, take it to me. I want to discuss it. Maybe I'll make a correction. Now, by the way, I'll tell you one last thing about Mishnah Berurah. Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, the son of Chofetz Chaim, writes, sometimes you'll learn a Mishnah Berurah in Chelek Beis, let's say by something that has to be dipped in a liquid, and then you learn the Mishnah Berurah in Chelek Hey, and you say, hey, it's a stira in the Mishnah Berurah. It's a stira. And then you'll say there'll be Tyrus, to farenfer, to answer up why it's not a contradiction. So Rabbi Aryeh Leib HaKohen said, the reason it's not a contradiction is the Chofetz Chaim learned different halakim of Mishnah Berurah with different chavrusas, and different parts of it were even written by different relatives. Some of it, there were contributions from one son-in-law, some from a different son-in-law. So naturally, not everything in it would be consistent. So the real answer is, it's not a contradiction, it's two different people. Just like you can have that in Tosfos. Sometimes the answer to a stira in Tosfos is, every Masechta had a different Baal Tosfos who was the main editor of that Masechta. But, and when they told the Chofetz Chaim, there's a contradiction, should we change it in the next edition? Chofetz Chaim said no. Hashgacha had it was printed this way, we're going to leave it. Anyway, Zechusay Yagein Aleinu, that's what the Pasuk tells us. If someone is weak in the area of tzaras, in the area of Lashon Hara, what do you do? Zois tia taras ha-Metzorah, b'yom ta'arasa, in the day of your purity, vehuva la Kohein, you got to be brought to the Kohein. The Kohein is the great Chofetz Chaim. By learning that Sefer, even just owning that Sefer, even if you don't learn the Sefer, go to the store and buy the book and put it on your table. Put it on next to you on the Shabbos table. So when you're about to say something, you'll look at the book, a whole book about it. And it will save you and will give you long life. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for next week's schedule. The shir will not be Wednesday night. Stay tuned for the schedule though. Okay?